You're listening to the Topco Business Unusual podcast. Now, the Business Unusual podcast. Learn from the greatest minds in business today. Interviews hosted by Ralph Fletcher. Learn how to improve business, get tips from industry leaders, and be motivated by real-life experience. Topco Business Unusual.
Welcome to the Topco Business Unusual podcast. And this week we have got a very special guest, Dr. Achieng Ojwang, the Executive Director from the Global Compact Network in South Africa. Welcome.
Thank you, Ralph. Thank you for having me.
Yes, and so I'm in sunny Cape Town. It's been extremely hot, so definitely the weather conditions are, heating up. Whereabouts are you? You look like you're at a university.
I am at a university indeed, sitting at Gibbs in Johannesburg. It's hot in Johannesburg today.
Is it? Yeah.
So yeah, we are on the same heat wave, I guess.
Okay. So, I mean, it's really good to have you on the podcast because I think we've spoken a couple of times and there's a number of initiatives that we're partnering on. But you also spoke at our Top Woman program last year. I think you guys got a standing ovation. I mean, the session that you did was really, really good. So maybe we can go into that a little bit. And I know that you're partnering us on the future of sustainability. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about that. But I suppose the sustainability journey, I mean, you are for a better word, a sustainability expert, really. I mean, globally recognized as one of the top 100 influencers around the world. So we're in good company talking around sustainability and I suppose what's happening in the world and whatever. But I mean, I'm always interested in people and what they do and how they got there. So I mean, how did you get to this point?
Thank you, Ralph. That's a very big question. So born in Kenya. I grew up in Kenya, but came to South Africa in my mid-20s. So I've actually spent as much time in South Africa as I have spent in Kenya, and happy to call both home. But I come from a very big family, a family of 13.
Wow. And
I was the middle child, the seventh, eighth child. And so
Same
I had
me.
a lot of, I grew up in a space that always had many people, many loving people around. I think the one thing that someone who knows who we are will tell you is that we are also a very studious family. So we loved school. My father was a teacher. And I think naturally we just drifted on the side of education. So I come from a family of very highly educated siblings. And so when I came to South Africa, this is way back in 1998 when Madiba was still president. And I came to school. I came to Wits University to do my master's. And I did that. I later did my doctorate in the Netherlands. And right from my master's, and actually even slightly before I embarked on the master's degree, I worked in Nairobi briefly. Yeah. And I found myself in the environmental forestry sector, even though my background is in the social sciences. And so by the time I came to do my MA degree, I really had certain questions planted in my head. So I come into South Africa, Wits University, sociology department, and it's that season that South Africa has intense discussions around transformation, the Black economic empowerment. What does democracy, the new South Africa mean for ordinary citizens? From an environmental side, I got linked up with an environmental scientist within the department, and that was my supervisor. So my earlier questions around the role of the private sector in environmental protection grew up from there, from my master's days. So very, very early on, I started trying to understand the concept of sustainable development. If South Africa's government is talking about transformation, at the same time, it's those early days, it's selling some of its assets as well that was considered non-core, like the forestry plantations. Government was selling a bit of this. So I begin to ask the question that if government is making policy, is withdrawing from some of these assets, what does this mean for the private sector? And especially the new companies that are buying into these assets, that are acquiring these assets. What does it mean when it's the regulator selling these assets to you, but at the same time they're talking about transformation? Does it mean, hypothetically, that then they have the power to ensure that for you as a new company, you are beginning the transformation journey right from the beginning? So if you think back to these questions I was asking and the current questions that we are asking in business around their role on sustainability, then you can see where my inspiration to do this work came from.
Yeah, I mean, in the research as well, I think it was the way it was sort of put is how are dreams of the young people in a new economy being realized by in business practices. And when I read that, and the other one around how government policies on transformation were being implemented sustainably in the business environment, I suppose I'd love to know, is there a difference then to now? Because if I look at organizations generally, if I look at leading organizations, the ones that we work with, we see a lot of case studies of organizations with great labor relations, responsibility, and actions. And we're seeing in many cases, there's this competition for talent. So it's moved from unions and government enforcing regulation to now skilled employees determining which organization is going to give the best, I suppose, experience for them. Is there a change?
Absolutely. The understanding of sustainability is maturing. I think back then, we already had the concept of sustainable development. If you remember back, Rio, that was 2002, I think.
Yeah.
The concept already existed. I think just its application to business wasn't that mature.
Yeah.
Fast forward to 2000, when the late Kofi Annan then establishes the UN Global Compact, and I head the UN Global Compact network in South Africa. So the late Kofi Annan, as Secretary General, establishes the UN Global Compact. I think for the first time, we see the first integrated framework that is now modernly called ESG. Within the Global Compact, we still call it the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. And this is about business understanding their role on human rights. What does it mean? And what does it take to respect human rights within business and business operations? What does it mean to protect labor, and what are those steps that a company must take? What does it mean to protect the environment? The climate debate is big now, and that is under that portfolio of the environment. And then what does it mean to drive anti-corruption processes so strongly so that we are building a transparent and a society that has high integrity. And so those are very, very early days. Companies at that point in time may have struggled. Sustainability maybe was more understood from the environmental side because somehow that is where it has emerged from. But here is the late Kofi Annan giving us with a small group of global CEOs saying, let us just use the existing international conventions that we already have and create a compact of shared values and principles. So they then base the business responsibility on existing conventions that government has already signed up to. And so this responsibility, if we think about them in that context, are not new. What is new is that we have then begun to unpack them for business so that business understands its role. You ask the question of young people, what does the young democracy mean for them? What should it mean for them within the context of business? It's, and we do get the data every now and again. Young people want to work in businesses that respect human rights, that respect labor, businesses that are sustainable and are responsible corporate citizens. That's very, very clear. And you'll see that, when we profile companies that probably are better retainers of talent, if you look at their ESG metrics, you'll realize that they perform a lot better than other companies. They perform better even in their listings, in their stock exchange listings. When they want to borrow money, they tend to attract lower cost of capital. So the business case for sustainability, the business case for companies being attuned and responding to our development priorities is pretty high at the moment. It has moved from these individual things or charity or little individual isolated good things that companies would do to sustainability becoming integrated into business strategy. And that is what we want to see.
Yeah.
The journey is ongoing. Companies are at different stages of this journey, but that is why we exist. To support them to be more attuned to the needs of society. And because when they do that, they're reducing their negative impact on society, but they're also building their reputation with society and creating and expanding their markets. Yeah. When there's that positive interaction within the societies that they operate.
So, I mean, obviously we know a lot of the data and the facts and the information. But and one of them, I suppose, that was shared, we did a press release recently, and one of the points you raised was that only 1% of the global procurement of, what was it, $11 trillion. 1% of $11 trillion goes towards woman-owned companies.
Enterprises.
Woman-owned enterprises. Right. But 1 in 3 of all companies are woman-owned. And so the correlation is not there. And there's other facts that you talk around, only 6% of government spending in South Africa, 74 billion, is going to woman-owned companies as well. 35% of board positions are held by women. Women get 23% less pay than in the pay gap. And we see those organizations who are sustainable, who are implementing these practices, who do have it part of their strategy, succeeding and doing better financially, better in terms of customers, better in terms of retention of their people. What's the problem? What's stopping organizations from moving this way, or what's the challenge here?
I think the challenge is big. It is structural. It is systematic. It is tipped onto the patriarchal setup of our economies and our society more broadly. that women haven't been valued in these spaces for a long time, traditionally, historically. And so the moment something is systematic, it takes a lot of will and work to undo that. And so at the moment, if you look at gender equality, and gender equality is not just about the economic aspect, there are also social aspects to it. In South Africa, we say gender-based violence is the second pandemic. So it's about freedom. It's about equality in very clear terms that how do we become a society that is enshrined in the principles of equality in all its dimensions, including equality of women and safety, and all the freedoms that come with that kind of society. So we have this reflecting in the way companies are traditionally set up. And so they have a lot of deficits in terms of where they are at. And so you can look at the different elements of it. You can look at representation, which is the easier one for people to talk about. You can look at issues around safety and health of women, education. You can look at the pay gap. You can look at women's being that we are very productive in the economy, but more in the informal economy. Why is our labor in the more formal economy not pronounced? Yeah, we need access. We need equal access to the opportunities that exist. And that is why I'm saying that if you look at the global procurement spend of, if you say 11 trillion within the business cycles itself, less than 1% of it is to women-owned businesses. How do we shift these around? And I always say numbers should be the easier ones for us to turn around. The more complex cultural ones can take time, but quantities, and it's within the influence of business, for instance, to turn around the pay gap, pay gap procurement. Those are issues that are within the influence of business to turn around. And so the way we come in is that as the UN Global Compact and as the network in South Africa, we offer companies the tools and the platforms for thought leadership, for discussions, for them to engage on how do we do this? How have you done it? The companies that are maybe claiming success, and there's not a lot of success holistically on all the dimensions. You might find that a company is successful in turning around its composition on the board, or in turning around the executive level composition to be more equal, but the pervasive ones like gender-based violence still may exist. So you find that companies may make strides on certain elements of it, but we are pushing for a more holistic approach to say that let us take gender equality seriously and drive it in all its dimensions.
So, I mean, part of the network is bringing together the different stakeholders, which is government, the private sector, and academia, and I suppose society. The State of the Nation address was held about a week ago, in fact, a week ago, and there was discussion around some of these issues that was brought up, and there seems to be a lot of weight in public discourse around government doing more. It seems that the Global Compact network is a little bit more focused on the role that business plays within this. You obviously sit in an academic institution at the moment, but you don't work for one. But I mean, they also play some form of role. How? I mean, are you finding these players coming together easily? Are you finding a challenge to get them to come together? Are you finding that there's a meeting of minds, or are you finding that they're structurally and ideologically different? I mean, how do we bring all How, what's the way forward here to accelerate
Are you
this?
asking bringing companies together to do this work in bigger quantities?
Yeah, well, how, I mean, I think the focus has been at the moment a little bit, how can we get companies to move along? But it's going to take all stakeholders, academics, government, and companies. But it does seem that just naturally anyway, those three groups don't naturally come together. They seem to have different sort of ways of working and different ideologies, should I say. Certainly in South Africa, the business world is very capitalistically orientated for profit. And government, I suppose, is more leaning towards socialistic issues. Is that the challenge? Is it the fact that we're not meeting enough around these things and getting common shared value? It seemed that in 1994, the success of the country was built on a shared values, shared vision. How do we bring these? What are you seeing as the challenges to bring these people closer?
In South Africa, we always say that we may agree on the goal, the end state of what we want, but not the journey, what it takes to get there because of these diverse interests. But again, South Africa is also a good example of collaboration. And we have, I think, numerous examples of when business and government and civil society have risen to work together. I must say that we see a lot more examples when there's a crisis. You saw how business rose to join hands with government during COVID. We've seen how businesses are trying to respond to the energy crisis. We are seeing how businesses are trying to respond to the logistics issue that we have at the moment. And so there are those nodes. And for me, I think what will bring us more and more together is to be able to use those good examples as models of good practice and try to amplify those as we up the advocacy. There'll always be need for advocacy. I don't think there's much that we have achieved as countries without a lot of advocacy within. And South Africa is a good example of using advocacy to push for change. Even our democracy is a result of a lot of advocacy and pressure and fighting for rights, right? Fighting for the democracy. And so we have enough good examples that we could leverage on to maybe step out to working on gender equality, for instance. I think it is possible with the right will, with the political will within business itself and within government and within our communities to say that we have a history of when we put our minds together, we see positive results. So it's in the joining of hands, it's in the collective action, I think, to just move a little up. So for us, we keep on pushing and we keep the advocacy going at the thesis that we still have.
So funny because in the middle of reading Elon Musk's book, and it actually almost feels like when things are calm, he is fretting and he is trying to engineer a crisis in his own organizations to move and change and move things. Like literally, it's like really uncomfortable for those people. The way it's written is like, I feel sorry for them. But he does these amazing leaps in technology and innovation. And he's creating like this massive problem that was always there, but he's putting an absolute spotlight on it and really having a tantrum in the nicest possible way. He's having a tantrum. Is that part of the role of the UN Global Compact network to create tantrums almost to get everybody to put their focus on this, or is that sort of what's needed now to
I think as the Global Compact in South Africa and as the UN Global Compact more broadly, what we advocate within business is forward thinking. So we want to be more proactive rather than reactive. And that is why in business we say plan for the long term and plan for the future. You cannot really predict, climate change or the impacts of it. Those were predicted already. And we've lived through some of them. And so we are saying, be ready. You must engage in a journey of transformation because the future might be different if we continue business as usual. Whether you look at water, you look at issues around climate, you look at issues around social cohesion, because the young people now and the ones coming after us won't look at these issues the same way that we have looked at them. And so for us, if business is interested in existing for the long term, then that proactivity is absolutely primary for their long-term existence. I think you could say the same for governments as well. And so that is why we are calling for a more united effort, because we have to create the future that we want, as we say.
Yeah. I've got some young children. I say young, 17, 20, and 24. And I remember when I was that age, was probably a little bit of a handful, and I think they are. But we've got a massive youth unemployment. I think it was highlighted the amount of skills we have in these youth, or education, should I rather say. And I can't help but thinking the changes that are needed, the disruption, the transformation, the different thinking is going to come from this group. How do we strategically empower the youth in a better way in our governments, in our municipalities, in our organizations? Because I think that although we have a very young population, I'm not sure we're doing enough to create room for them in all aspects.
It's unfortunate that we are not having young people at the forefront of everything that we are doing, whether it's policy making, whether it's implementation of those. So the thinking, the strategic thinking around these issues. And again, I think it's just being comfortable or deliberately wanting to do things the way we've always done them. And I'll give you a good example of one program that we run within the UN Global Compact. It's based on the SDGs, so it's called the SDG Innovators Program. And on this program, we reach out to the companies that we work with, because we are a company-based platform. So we reach out to companies and we say, give us up to 4 young people from your business. They can come from the different units of your business. They could be engineers or accountants or sustainability people or technical people. They just need to be young and in the business. They send these young people to us, and we take them through a 9-month process, not every day, maybe twice a month. We convene, and we take them through design thinking, innovation. They look at the SDGs as a challenge board, and they solve for them in a way that will have a positive impact on society and in a way that is scalable. So we just give them a very clear criteria that whatever solution you come up with after this process of induction, ensure that it will change lives, it is scalable, but it will also make sense from the company that has sent you here. And that is how we are trying to integrate how business is transforming and innovating, to use that to ensure that the business that we are going to have from now henceforth is quite attuned to the needs of society. So you're solving for both the business, the market, and you're solving for society as well. What I can tell you is that in the 5 years that we have delivered this program, many of those young people have come up with viable projects for their companies. I know that the mining sector, many companies in the mining sector are solving for waste, turning those into products. Within that process, they are also saying this innovation that we have created, we manage and go to the benefit of communities around us. We have some banks putting SDG bonds out into the market out of this program. So there are many, many innovations that young people have created out of this program. I think the point I'm trying to make is that before we started this program, probably in those companies, there was no space to engage young people like that. Young people are sitting with a lot of imagination, with a lot of ideas. They just sometimes need the space and
they've got a point to prove.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've been mind blown by the ideas that have come out of the different cohorts over the years. So we need, it's not only in business, in the public sector, in the civil society space, in communities. I think we need to be deliberate in the way that we think about young people, in the way that we think about opportunities for young people. And we are on our way out. We're not going to be here for too long. So we need to create a culture where young people have a voice. They have the resources that they require. They have the education that they need. And they sometimes just need a bit of a push and mentorship, but it has to be deliberate in doing so.
I mean, tying all this together, you started off by saying we need to be forward thinking. But forward thinking for who? And if it's for them, they should be part of the thinking because it's their future they're building and the future for their children's children.
In one of the forums, one young person stood up and said, the problem here is that people are always thinking they can solve for us. And they said, please do not talk about young people without young people in the room. And I support that.
Yeah, I love that. So here's the challenge. Can we share this program? Can we scale it in and amongst companies so they can do this themselves? Because obviously you've got the case study, you've got the evidence, you've got a framework that works. Is this something that is scalable that other organizations can implement themselves, or is it they have to work with you? How could this work?
So we are also scaling it up. And of course, companies can use the learning that they've derived from it to run their own innovations and to scale them up in their communities and within their areas of operations. But because it has been so successful, but we only give that value to young people from the companies that work with us. What we have said is that going forward, we are going to scale it up and we are opening it up to young people, young entrepreneurs out there, young people from communities, from TVET colleges. So in the coming months, we will finalize those plans and we should be able to advertise, put it out there and begin accepting young people broadly beyond the realm of companies.
Yeah. And do you think companies could emulate or partner with you as well to implement it within their organizations? Do you think that's something that's doable?
Absolutely. It's the one program that is always oversubscribed, but I think it's because of the value that companies see in it, but also because young people are quite interested in it. You know that those 2 days away from your little corner in a company is sometimes a breath of fresh air for them. So just opening their minds to what is out there. And so it has gained a lot of interest. I can tell you for certain that there are several companies waiting for us to scale it up, and they are willing to support it as we scale up even beyond their basis.
Yeah, and then I'm thinking schools now. I'm thinking, I don't know, we spoke about Japan earlier.
Yes.
And I was saying, you're saying you're going there. My children desperately want to go there. But my eldest son actually did go there. He represented South Africa and they competed in Japan. And he was amazed I didn't know this, but there's no one to clean a classroom. The kids clean their own school. They do the sweeping, they clean the desks, they wipe down the windows. They are in, it's their school and they're in charge of looking after it. And I can't help but think that it's great to help people when they're coming to work, but how do we, kids who are being educated, because I think there's some room for improvement in education and inspiration. And it seems when I listen to young people that these issues are certainly really important to them. And so how do we drive it in schools?
Young people want to be part of the solution. And so the moment you include them, the moment you show them a sense of ownership, that you're part of this, they will, I'm telling you, they won't even sweep that class for too long. They will innovate and create things to clean the classroom. And so we must listen to young people. We must include them. We must create spaces. Every spaces should be friendly to young people. Should make young people feel like my idea matters, right? My contribution matters in whatever small way. My opinion matters.
So, I mean, we also are working with you. There's a report that's coming out later this year that's going to the New York office, I think from the presidency, and just talking around the role that both government and business has played in the advancement and the success of the Sustainable Development Goals, and a bit of I suppose, a moment in time. Where are we? What's worked? And where have organizations succeeded? And it was interesting, you said earlier, not everybody's doing well on everything. It's generally one thing they're getting right. And so I suppose the next challenge is how do we share those things they are getting right? I mean, what are the lessons that we've learned so far? What are you seeing from the reports that are coming in? You're probably not allowed to tell us, or?
No, I can. The draft is not complete, it's not ready, but it's called, from our end, as the network, what we were mandated to do was to collate the private sector's performance to date on sustainable development goals. How is the private sector doing on the SDGs? Government, the National Planning Commission and the DPME and the presidency first approached us in 2019. So we did support government back then to get private sector inputs into the national report. The background of that is that when South Africa as a country has signed up to the SDGs as a member state of the United Nations, then they are obligated to report back on our progress as a country periodically. And so we first did it in 2019. We should have done it again already, but COVID came in the way. And so government is saying again that we are reporting in 2024, July this year. And so they asked us as the network to support them again by bringing in the private sector voice and performance and data to this process. So we've been doing it for the past, I think, almost 7 months. And the first thing we do, and we have a sound methodology now, but the first thing we want to understand with this report is that how is the private sector prioritizing the SDGs and which ones are they focusing on and why? And in 2019, I don't have the report in front of me, but I'll just tell you the 2 or 3 that I remember. In 2019,
putting you on the spot here, I'm sorry.
Sector. No, it's okay. Across the private sector, when we aggregated the response, their number 1 priority across the SDGs was SDG 8, which is on decent work and economic growth. So the private sector believes and understands, rightly so, that their greatest influence and capacity is in creating jobs and driving economic growth. That is not changed in the 2024 draft report that we have. I'll give you a difference that we are seeing. In 2019, the private sector said their number 2 priority and area of influence of their material issue from the SDGs would be SDG 4 at number 2. SDG 4 is on quality education, ensuring quality education, access, quality, the best outcomes that we want. And that is linked to skills as well that the private sector requires. In 2024, at number 2 is climate action.
Sure.
And we see education sort of lose priority a little bit, but that might just be because there's been a lot of global campaigns and internal campaigns coupled with load shedding and the work that organizations like ourselves are doing. There are several organizations as well in South Africa working with companies on climate. So it makes sense that the private sector is prioritizing climate. SDG 3 on health has also gained some ground, but in 2024 at number 3, and this is pleasant for us who work in this space, and it was maybe number 13 in 2019, SDG 17 on partnerships become number 3 in 2024.
Sure.
So for the first time, I think the private sector is acknowledging that they can't do it alone. They need to do it in partnerships with others, drive these development priorities in collaboration. That is the sort of a teaser that I would give you, but you can already see that we are getting some very insightful trends and insights from the private sector on how they're viewing the SDGs and where they think they can create the most value, both for them, their businesses, and for society.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. I'm looking forward to the full report. I know that your team are involved with the Future of Sustainability next month in March. Are these the sort of things that are going to be discussed? And I suppose a deeper question really is, how important is events like that and Top Woman guys to be involved in? What's the sort of impact that it creates?
I think as Topco, you are doing a great job at convening. The Future of Sustainability Summit is going to be a great platform, and that is why we are strategically partnering with yourselves. For us, we want learning to take place. We want these engagements to take place as often as is possible, because there's a lot of learning from peers as well. There's a lot of great insights that we get when various companies from South Africa and sometimes even from across the continent come together to share their experiences. It would be a good platform. Unfortunately, I'm out of the country at that time, but it would have been a good platform for us to go into a bit of detail onto what this report is saying. And so we might get back to you on that. I don't have the timelines on my fingertips, but if by that time we would have obtained the draft report, I think that would be a great platform.
Yes.
Have some of these discussions to begin drilling deep onto what they mean and the whys, and the targets and the investments that are being made.
And the next steps. I mean, it's sort of like if you tie those 3 priorities together, you talk about growth, climate action, and partnerships.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty compelling sort of priority for, I suppose, business, but also for government in a way. I suppose why there's probably a collaboration with our organizations as well is because I think we understand that these partnerships are what brings about meaningful change. Government, universities, academics, but the public sector, and also UN and agencies like the United Nations. It's critical. It's like civil society, I suppose. And I suppose it's about bringing those role players together, because like we said earlier, they don't generally hang out together because they're almost in their own little sort of world. And I suppose entrepreneurs are linked to that as well. Private sector is big business in many ways, and then entrepreneurs, the innovators.
Yes, and perhaps, Ralph, what I could add is that this report that is looking at the private sector performance on ESG and on the SDGs, and ESGs, environmental, social, and governance obligations or responsibilities of companies, very linked to the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals as well. But there's two other or three other components of this report that is going to make for great engagement, and also with government and civil society, that we've looked at performance across business, and that's the one I just talked about. We've also looked at issues per sectors, and we've taken the top 6 sectors of the economy based on their contribution to GDP. So the size, the first big 6 sectors. What are the trends? What are they putting their money on when they use the SDG framework? The interesting thing that will be coming from the sectors is that we want an authentic report. So they will say, this is where we are struggling, and we want to hear that as well, the gaps. But they're also saying these are the policy gaps that we are seeing. So it also makes for a great engagement tool with the policy makers. We delve deep onto certain top priorities that we think are the top 10 priorities for South Africa. We have job employment in there, SDG 8. We have gender equality, climate, energy, SDG 7. So these are investments on the SDGs. We have 10 different topics that we think are top priority in South Africa. And we will also go deep and unpack those. So and I think this is what also drives collaboration when we come together to unpack the private sector thinking and contributions to some of these development priorities. So we look forward to further, much deeper engagement based on this report, Ralph.
Wow. Yeah, I think we're going to be looking forward to that, and would love to be involved in that as well. Sometimes we try and view sustainability in a very simple light, but there's often misconceptions about it. What are the common misconceptions about people's understanding of sustainability?
One is that we are doing this stuff, or
or someone else is doing it.
And there's the confusion with doing charity. But we say that when you engage your company and integrate sustainability, you are integrating it into strategy. You are saying, what is my impact, both my negative and positive impacts on society?
Yeah.
And if I have negative impacts, whether it's on climate or on employment or on human rights, how do I solve for that?
Yeah.
How do I ensure that going forward, I will not be having a negative impact on society? That is the one thing. So you then think about it from a business perspective. The second arm of it is that there are opportunities in being sustainable. Yeah. For one, you are creating a better reputation, you're gaining or strengthening your social license to operate. The second one is that you are then able to innovate and expand your markets. Imagine if more of us were educated and skilled. That is a market right there. For the banks that want more people to bank with them, you have just unlocked a market opportunity because you're doing good and you understand that these issues are material for you. So we want business to begin to look at these societal issues, not as add-on, but responding to them is integral to the way that they do business. And so that is one. There's a landscape challenge that I can talk about across the board for business. If you are in a developing country like South Africa, the demands on business is massive. Yeah. Because we work globally, we see that companies in the north don't have a lot of societal requirements or expectations on their resources, on their time, and so
or impact
South
in their
Africa,
business.
yes. So we are different in the South, that we have a lot of demand, and companies in the South have to step up a lot more strongly, because we still have a long way to go. So if you compare the northern and the southern companies, you will see that our companies actually do really have to respond to a range of responsibilities.
Sure. I mean, it's interesting you talk around strategy and integration into their strategy, and then for organizations to be part of the SDGs. I suppose the main calling card in many ways is the public sort of, I don't know, what is it? The telling the world that we're looking to change and we're looking to be sustainable. I mean, how do you explain that? I mean, it's a declaration of sorts, isn't it, by the CEO of the organization? How do we get individuals to also create these declarations as well? Is that something that's an opportunity there?
Absolutely, absolutely. There's individual responsibility as well, and I think the perfect SDG to use is SDG 5, on gender equality, and I'll once again talk on gender-based violence. And it is clear out there that it happens at the workplace. Sexual harassment at work. I mean, there are several cases of those. For women, we are not safe in public transport. We are not safe even just walking the streets, wanting to go for a job, right? And so we are denied those freedoms that may be taken for granted elsewhere. So we ask companies to ensure that they're doing all they can to eradicate violence at work. But of course, there's a personal responsibility as well, right? And there's a responsibility for the entire system, society, to work on certain things. So we are not divorcing personal responsibility. We are actually asking that we all do what we need to do at whatever level that we are, if it's within the company space. And that is why when we talk about gender equality in the business realm, we say business ensure that you are integrating these principles in your strategy, in your operations, in your supply chains, and within the communities that you operate. So the responsibility is not confined to the workplace. It extends beyond the walls of the office.
So I mean, what are organizations getting wrong when it comes to gender empowerment? What could they do better?
I think this need for more deliberate action through policies. We need safe spaces. There's need for companies to create space to have these conversations, right? And to begin implementing all that is within their power to implement, to avoid, to ensure that the workplace isn't a space that you use for sexual harassment, for favoritism, because there's so many elements to it that makes some of these spaces quite uncomfortable for women. And so we are saying, do whatever it takes, and we give them the guidance to do that. We have actually an assessment tool. And Ralph, it's important that you are asking this, because even myself, I've used in the past, tried to use this assessment tool before, and it's mind-blowing. It's an e-tool, so it's on the internet. You get access to it, and the way it asks you the questions as a company, right? It will say, it will do the quantitative assessments. How many employees do you have? It will look at your remuneration to try and figure out where the pay gap exists and how much of that it will ask you questions like, where do your entry-level employees come from, and what mode of transport do they use to work? How many changes in the transport system do they have to make before they get to work? What this tool tries to do is to enlighten the employer that you actually have a responsibility. If you're going to employ a woman who has to wake up at 4 a.m. to get to the workplace by 8, and I've come across so many obstacles within the public system, then what is your responsibility? So very intuitive, but also very introspective. And that is how we support companies to think about some of the actions that they can take to work against some of the violence that may exist within their areas of operations. So we support with tools, with guidance materials, and platforms for learning, so they're learning from each other. I keep saying that, as I said earlier, and within the report that we just spoke about, when we assess companies' performance on SDG 5, which is gender equality, you'll find a few companies doing well. They've really transformed their board level composition. They've transformed their executive. Maybe they're still struggling with transformation at the lower levels. But there's this silence on the page. And that is the one area that I believe is within the influence of business to change, because that is a numbers game, right? This is a numbers game, not a social issue that might be a bit more complex to deal with. Why aren't we solving for the low-hanging fruit?
Yeah. It would be interesting to unpack that.
Absolutely.
It was very insightful to speak to you. I've got so many more questions to ask you, but time has sort of run out. So, but I mean, it would be great to do this again, because it's also speaking about the same sort of issues with sustainability. What are the challenges that businesses aren't getting right with it? I suppose we'll unpack some of those at the conference. Hopefully we see you this year at Top Woman in, I think it's October or November again this year. And I want to hear all about your Japan trip when you get back. And hopefully you'll help us share these insights that you've gleaned from businesses' journey in terms of sustainability with us as well. And we can work with you on that. It was great having you on the podcast. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Ralph, for having me. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, it was
see you
awesome.
again soon.
Yes, definitely will do.
Okay.